Just minutes after the Tanner Banks deal, Dave Dombrowski did not stop working the phones, landing another deal to make a little bit of a change up in this bullpen. This time sending away Gregory Soto, who's had a questionable role in this team with kind of a even less of a fit on the roster following the addition of Tanner Banks here. Me and Luke Arcaini are here to break everything down from the Phillies perspective, talk about who's coming in and everything else that you do need to know. Once again, this coming from a Jeff Passan bomb just 18 minutes after the trade deadline, as all the details flew in, a lot of paperwork being filed, all those things. So we're going to dive into every part of it, but before we get there, we do want to make sure you guys are smashing that subscribe button right now. Right now, 95.4% of you guys tuning into the channel have not subscribed just yet, so we got to keep this Phillies Digest family growing, so make sure you're smashing that button and tagging along. Now, Luke Arcaini, let's talk about this deal a little bit. What was your initial reaction? Gregory Soto out the door, another Philly heading down to Baltimore there. Take me through where your mind's at.
Yeah, the Orioles put together the infinity stones of the mid bullpen pitchers for the Phillies. Yeah, I don't know. Definitely one that caught me off guard. Was not expecting a major league arm that, while he may not be the best in your bullpen,
right,
he's still throwing innings for you out of your bullpen. So the fact that he was traded for two guys that have never sniffed the majors, that shocked me a little bit. But I mean, if you look at the stats and at least like the track record of the two guys that Phillies got, I mean, that's a win of a trade for the Phillies, based off of how much Soto is really going to throw high leverage for you, especially if Tanner Banks can handle that left-handed reliever versus left-handed batter's role, which was really all Gregory Soto was, right?
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't many chances where they were voluntarily bringing Soto in against a right-handed batters. So, listen, it was a bit questionable for me just because they lost a major leaguer and traded and got two minor leaguers with the stance of where they're at right now.
Right.
But as far as the trade itself goes, I mean, I'd say it's a win.
Okay. Yeah, no, that makes sense. And obviously, in an ideal world, that Gregory Soto is not a guy that you want pitching those high leverage situations or really any significant playoff innings, as you mentioned. To dive into what he's produced this season, in 43 games, 2 home runs allowed, 44 strikeouts, but a 4.08 ERA there, 1.585 whip. A guy that, like, frankly, I think has been in and out of Rob Thomson's trust. There was the quote a couple weeks ago about how he's earned these high leverage opportunities, and then he went and just had an absolutely awful game, loaded the bases, and really cost them the overall win there. So that was kind of the end of the Gregory Soto being climbing in the pecking order, and I do think that there is something to this, and especially with these other additions, which I still think the prize of this trade deadline is absolutely Carlos Estevez here. That is the guy I think that will be pitching in those moments and has a chance to cement himself as the closer of this team. Tanner Banks, also a guy that I think will be significantly more impactful, but in each of those deals that you did have to give up prospects. So I think this was a little bit of a mindset to bring some back with Seth Johnson, and of course that we did not mention the additional move here to bring in Moises Chase as the two names. So not going to get too in-depth on each of these prospects, as obviously this is guys that we will learn about in the long term, but I know you did have a little bit to add on Seth Johnson, right, Luke?
Yeah, so as far as Seth Johnson goes, it's funny. He actually has a pretty crazy story. He came into he was originally a shortstop, back all the way in like JUCO, and then he went to college, and then they ended up flipping him to a pitcher. But I mean, in a loaded Baltimore Orioles list of top prospects, he's ranked 8th right now, at least before the season started. So I mean, he's only 25 years old. Has around, it's about like 4 pitches.
Yeah.
Fastball, curveball, slider, changeup. As far as this year in Double-A, 18 starts with an ERA under 2.7, which is really good. Total innings around 65, 19 earned runs, 5 homers allowed, 35 walks. But he's also struck out 61 batters. The hitters are hitting just 219. So the thing with Seth Johnson is right now he sort of comes in as maybe rotation depth, but he has the stuff that leads me to believe that he could be flipped into a bullpen guy eventually. He has that sort of bite on his fastball. He gives off very bullpen vibes from what I've seen over the last 25 minutes.
Sure.
He seems like a guy that the Phillies, once they get to October, once that that playoff roster gets expanded, they could give him a chance come like late September. Um, Definitely not some high leverage sort of guy, but with the way he throws, I think he could maybe have a chance at that last bullpen spot in September.
Okay, yeah, and he is a guy that is on the older side, as you mentioned, 25 years old. And to add a little bit, a 2.63 ERA and 4.13 FIP in 65 innings pitched at Double-A there. He is older for the prospects, which you can look at as a positive or negative in this. Obviously, the Phillies are in win-now mode, which we kind of spoke about, a team that I think all of us consider have a legitimate chance at the World Series this year. Now, granted, with that conversation being had, I don't think this was a deadline that really indicated that to the extent that I wanted it to. That I did believe this should have been an all-in deadline. We kind of were picking up the pieces during the Tanner Banks video that you guys can also check out there. Now that the dust has settled a little bit, are you feeling satisfied with kind of how this trade deadline played out, Luke?
As far as around the league, yeah, I think so. And here's why, right? Going into the deadline, I think the biggest need for the Phillies was to bolster the bullpen, and the bullpen needed to get better. All we've seen the last 2 years in the playoffs, really with this pitching is you get there and these arms get tired, right? And you need good arms. You need as many good arms as you possibly can once you get to October. And the Phillies added. They added Estevez last week. They added Tanner Banks, and now they added a guy in Seth Johnson who could maybe be there eventually. But I think there's a bit of an overreaction right now on the bats. I wanted another bat. Like I wanted the Phillies to sign another bat today. But if you look at some of the names that got dealt today, like some of these packages were just absurd.
Right.
Like that Tanner Scott package, and that's obviously separate because he's a relief pitcher, he's a pitcher. But I mean that's absurd, man. That is a haul of prospects for that guy. Who one is a great reliever, but that's a bit of a too big of a package for me there. I just think these teams won. This trade deadline was weird.
Yeah.
The White Sox, while they dealt, they didn't do anything with Luis Robert. They didn't do anything with Garrett Crochet, right? Those are the two names that I think everybody really thought was like going to be sort of the two big moves of this trade deadline. I mean, the White Sox were sort of expected to control this deadline, and they did. They just controlled it sort of in the wrong way. The Angels, right, were sought out to be a team that was going to trade a ton of bats. I thought for the last 4 months I've been asking for Taylor Ward. Not even a name. Not even a single name mentioned as a rumor with him these last few days. It was just like it was a time that it seemed like these teams were asking for so much. And like, listen, I want the team to make a move, but when it comes down to it, I don't think you can just trade guys to trade guys.
Right.
Like we're not. I don't think the point of the trade deadline is to just go make as many trades as you can. Like you have to think about your organization and you have to think about your team, right? It comes to a point where Bryce Harper, Kyle Schwarber, Trey Turner, Nick Castellanos, JT Realmuto, Alec Boehm, right? These guys have to step up. Like your fourth outfielder in 2023 wasn't the reason you lost to the Diamondbacks. The reason you lost to the Diamondbacks was because Bryce Harper and Trey Turner went 0 in game 6 and 7.
Yeah.
Like I would have loved another bat, but you win because of your stars. Like you win because of your star play. And over these last 2 weeks, I mean that's not where it's been. And I know this team's good enough. Like I've watched a lot of Phillies baseball this year. I know this team built right now is good enough, but the stars have to play like stars. And I don't care who you get at the deadline. If Bryce Harper's hitting like he's hitting right now and Trey Turner's hitting like he's hitting right now, they're not going anywhere.
Yeah, a lot of good takes there. You fired me up a little bit about this Phillies team. A little more optimism back there.
They're good enough. They just have to play like it. Like that's really what it comes down to. And they did it for the whole, first half of the season. And they hit this rut. And everybody hits ruts in baseball. Like I can't stand when I see this. Like there's so many fans that I've realized that only watch the Phillies. They're one-eyed, like no opening in their visor, right? They are dead straight ahead. They only watch the Phillies, and the second they lose a game, they don't realize that 14 other teams lost a game that day,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
If the Phillies lose a team, there's always a losing team, right? There's 29 teams don't win, and the Phillies lose in the same day. That doesn't happen, right? you go through ruts. Like that is why one, you build a lead. They've lost the last 4 series. They've lost the last 5 series openers. They've gained a game in the division lead. Like, that's where we're at right now. So, was this the perfect deadline? No. Did they do what we asked them to do? Just about. This bullpen's way better than it was a week ago. Austin Hayes is an option. He shouldn't go out there and play every day, but he's a good platoon option, right? They have options. These guys just need to pick it up and they need to go do it now.
Yeah, absolutely. Well put on a lot of that there. I'm kind of pretty much with you that I think this was not a deadline that I would grade as a smashing success, but they still did improve, and that's kind of the point of it. It is kind of a little bit surprised me, I would say, that the reputation of Dave Dombrowski, he's a guy that will sell the farm for the current moment, that he is such a win-now guy that doesn't worry about prospects, and that really has not played out since he has been in control of the Phillies here. But to mention one of these guys that has played out, and they did add, and that we do believe is going to be a key part of it, is Tanner Banks. So my last question before we wrap up here, do you have any concern when looking ahead at splits? So this year in 2024, against right-handed hitters, you mentioned hitting over 300. The splits 308, 372, and 477. Against lefties, 184, 229, and 263. If you want to flash back to his splits from last season, not quite as clean. That righty's a little better at 282, 331, and 550. And then lefties, 205, 272, and 337. So I guess it does stretch out over kind of a 2-year period here. That's pretty much all we should accept it is, as a kind of a matchup pitcher, right? Nothing too much more than that.
Yeah, I don't think Tanner Banks is going to be seeing much ninth inning time. But I think he's going to be a guy that if a Shohei Ohtani's up at the plate and Matt Strom's already used, right? Like this guy's lethal against left-handed batters. Like that's a guy you can trust strictly against lefties. If a Matt Olson's in there, if a Freddie Freeman's in there, there's a lot of good lefties that are going to be in these lineups that the Phillies are going to have to face in October. So that's kind of where I think their head's at there. And I think it just came down to they didn't trust Gregory Soto anymore, right? They gave him chances, and he was having a hard time throwing strikes. And if you're a bullpen guy, you have to throw strikes.
Yeah, absolutely nailed it there. So plenty more to get into for this Phillies season. We will be here from start to finish. And once again, make sure you guys are smashing that subscribe button. At this point in time, 95.4% of you guys not subscribed to the channel yet. We are now through the MLB trade deadline, so this Phillies team is what it's going to be. We're going to be breaking things down on just about an everyday basis for everything that has to do with this team. So make sure you're tapping in, smashing that subscribe button, like this video, and we'll be talking to you next time right here on Phillies Digest. Peace.